Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this evening's edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight, another slap for the Eastern Cape Education Department as a High Court orders it to give children the books they need for their education, as well as pay the costs of the legal challenge. But why must it always take the courts to get this department to do the right thing? That's the question we are asking this evening. Opposition parties tell us about a new initiative they've decided on today, which is aimed at forcing Parliament to follow through on recommendations that several inquiries, in the latest being the Judge Zondo's state capture one. And today being World Social Worker Day, we hear from people who spend their time taking care of our elderly, the sick and the infirm. We'll also bring you some excerpts from today's parliamentary debate on Russia and Ukraine. All that coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. It's become something of a ritual for community organizations and NGOs operating in the field of education in the Eastern Cape province. Almost always they have to drag the education department to court just to get it to do what it's constitutionally mandated to do. It's been no different this year. 2 months into the school year, more than 3,000 schools are still without books. The reason the Kula Community Development Project last month took the department to court. Today, the Makhanda High Court made a ruling. And to take us through it is Cecile van Schalkwyk from the Legal Resources Center, which represented the applicants. Good evening, Cecile. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Very briefly, a bit of background to this court challenge. Why Kula, decided to take this matter to court?
Thank you, Vuyo. Thank you for having us. So just a bit of background. On the 12th of January this year, the schools were informed by way of a memorandum that the Department of Basic Education will only be able to deliver stationery sort of by mid-February of this year, and they'll only be able to deliver all the textbooks to the schools by between March and May of this year. And Kuda Development Forum, as well as ourselves and many of the schools that gave affidavits, parents of learners who were very concerned about this and who were affected by this, sort of felt, this was unacceptable. The impact on the learners, the impact on teaching and learning in schools could not continue. The infringement of the right to basic education could not continue. And that sort of really prompted the start of this litigation. It's difficult to understand exactly what led to the late delivery of textbooks or the late ordering thereof. The department informed schools that it was as a result of budget shortfalls, but we are still a little bit unclear on exactly how that came about and how that impacted on the late ordering and the subsequent late delivery of textbooks that we have now seen.
Have you been any clearer over the past a few weeks at least, or from the time you lost the application, as to what they actually meant by budget shortfalls?
Vuyo, I think, today that was one of the issues that was raised in court, was the fact that the department was quite vague in their papers about what exactly had resulted in the budget shortfall, right? And why that meant that they couldn't deliver the textbooks on time, and what steps they were taking to sort of mitigate the impact of that. So we aren't much clearer than we were, and the court was very clear today as well that that wasn't acceptable, and that was one of the reasons why the court granted the order today, was to say, if the department isn't able to explain to us and to give the court court a good explanation of why these textbooks can only be delivered at the dates that they proposed they would deliver it by, then the court just can't abide by their sort of version of events, and that's what led the court to grant the order that delivery should happen by the 31st of March instead of the 29th of April, which was finally the date that the Education Department proposed.
So, the court is having none of it, and they have basically ordered them to ensure that they deliver these books by the end of the month.
Yes, absolutely. I think that was really the sticking point during today's litigation. The department had proposed that they will be able to deliver by the 29th of April. Our clients weren't happy with that. We weren't happy with that, and the court wasn't happy with that. And the real reason, I think, for that is because it wasn't clear why it could not be delivered by the 31st of March. They said in their court papers that about 80% of the books are in warehouses. And the court said, it doesn't make sense to us that if 80% of the books are there and we're awaiting the rest of the deliveries to the warehouses, then why must it take 45 days from today for the books to only be delivered to school?
Now, previously, you, together with the applicants, asked the department to outline steps that that they would take to ensure that this kind of problem doesn't occur next year and the year after that, and so on. Was that subject also part of this litigation?
Yes. So if you sort of have regard to the court order, what the court ordered today was obviously, I think our great concern is that this might arise again in the future. Right. And we desperately need that not to happen, because the impact on learners, especially in light of what has happened with COVID, it's inexcusable. So the court today ordered that there is sort of an oversight by the court, not only in the current delivery of textbooks. So the department has been ordered to report back to the court within 7 days to give them some kind of an update on where they are at with the delivery. And then by the end of September of this year, they must give a full report to the court on how they are doing with the ordering and the delivery of textbooks for the 2023 academic year. And we really hope that will sort of incentivize the department to work harder at it and to make absolutely sure that, that it won't happen again. And hopefully with the oversight of the court, we will see delivery of textbooks before the 2023 academic year commences.
And of course, I think for the benefit of our viewers who may not have been following this particular story, it's worth pointing out that at some point you had parents, teachers, and the community, in this quandary where, on the one hand, they had to, really make sure that everyone is aware of these children's plight and the fact that the department didn't seem to care, and on the other, they wanted to ensure that their children's, academic or school year is actually not disturbed. But caught between these, two opposites, they at some point had to, say there should be no schooling, just to bring people's attention to this crisis.
Yeah, so I think that the schools that we sort of interacted with haven't closed down schools, for example, because of the textbook issue. I think there's been other issues as well that have been burning within the Eastern Cape that has led to some school closures. For example, the non-payment of assistants, teaching assistants, and those kinds of things have definitely led to the closure of schools in specifically the Makanda area. But I think that if one starts to talk about the impact on learning and teaching, it is enormous. You can imagine if a school doesn't have the textbooks, what steps they must then take to mitigate that, right? So a lot of schools rely on photocopies, which is often difficult to manage because children don't have files, because they obviously hadn't received stationery either. So they didn't have files to keep the copies in. So they kept losing papers. They lost, the photocopies of the textbooks that were made. It's, of course, also a very costly endeavor for schools, and these are no fee-paying schools. So it's not like parents are paying school fees that can substitute their budgets. They're completely reliant on the department for their budgets. And, if you think about the impact on learners, we, for example, had parents who attested to affidavits where they said, as parents, it's so difficult, first of all, to be able to buy the stationery. People are unemployed or they don't have the financial means to necessarily pay and buy the stationery when the department doesn't deliver it. And if you think about the textbooks, I mean, especially in the younger grades, a lot of the learning and teaching that happens there is very much dependent on sort of being able to look at a textbook that is printed in color. So, I mean, one of the examples that one of the teachers and parents mentioned is a textbook would say, count how many blue apples there are and how many red apples there are. But now if a child is relying on a photocopy, they can't differentiate the color. So it has an impact on sort of the level at which these learners are being taught, right? And a lot of the learners simply didn't have anything to write in. They didn't have anything to write with. So it impacts on everything. It impacts on the ability of the school to assess the learners. It impacts on the ability of the learners to learn at all. And ultimately it is an infringement of the right to basic education.
Well, one would have thought that a Department of Education would know that and would have to wait for someone else to tell them. A very quick last one, if I may, to say, has anyone been able to, put a finger on why this particular department is a serial offender, and why these things continue?
I mean, I think your guess is as good as mine. I think that for a number, listen, it's not the province has a lot of sort of schools and a lot of schools that historically, I think, have been in, if you think about sort of maintenance that has to happen on a lot of these schools, they were historically in areas that might not have, benefited as much from state funding as other areas had. So I think it's a big feat for the department, first of all. But I do think also that the department has simply been marred by a lot of poor administration, a lot of there's been a lot of corruption, and that's obviously been reported on as well. And I think that currently one of the issues, of course, is that the Department of Education is being hit by austerity budgeting. And the simple fact that, they cut budgets, which has an impact, and you know that it's starting to show, unfortunately, and it's starting to show in education. And I think one of the things that the court also sort of heard argument on today was the fact that, when budgets are cut and when there's less money available, that should not impact on basic education, right? That shouldn't be the first place where the impact is felt. And I think it's important for government and for education departments to redirect their minds to that, to say that, if we have less money that's being allocated, we cannot have that impact the quality and the goods in education that we are delivering to children, because it is a basic human right. It's immediately realizable, and it needs to be realized in a very real and tangible sense.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it, Cecil. Thank you very much for your time this evening. She is from the Legal Resources Center. They won. They were representing a community organization, the Kula Community Development Project, which had applied to the Makhanda High Court for forcing the Provincial Department of Education to provide books to over 300 schools that 2 months into the school year still don't have them, or certainly not in the quantities that they are expected or supposed to have them. We did, by the way, invite the Department of Education. They promised to look into our request. Up until now, they have not responded, and calls or phones are not being answered lately. After the break, UDM President General Olomisa tells us why opposition parties have taken the extraordinary step of wanting to force both Parliament and Cabinet to do something about reports of various commissions set up to look into corruption, the collapse of intelligence services, trouble at the PIC, and several others. That interview coming up in a moment. Welcome back. Opposition parties want Parliament to establish ad hoc committees to process the Zondo Commission, Party Commission, Mufamadi Commission, and several other reports. They have resolved to write to National Assembly Speaker Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula and President Cyril Ramaphosa to seek an audience on issues of national importance. Opposition parties met in Parliament today to discuss the state of governance in the country, as Bulani Philip reports.
A meeting described as being fruitful as parties put aside their political and ideological differences to discuss issues of common interest. Party leaders want Parliament to process 4 critical reports. These include the Party Commission that probed maladministration at the Public Investment Corporation, the Mufamadi Commission report that investigated malfeasance at the State Security Agency, the 2021 July unrest report by a panel of experts, as well as the Zondo Commission report into state capture.
There's a number of resolutions around some of the key issues that we're interested in the Party Commission into the July unrest, the Mufamadi Commission into the state of the State Security Agency, and of course Zondo, how Parliament's going to process these.
We resolved that there is a need to see the President and also to ask him in the process, how far has he gone in implementing the Mufamadi task team's findings on to fix our security agent. What's going on? The mayhem of last year, who is involved?
We'll be calling for ad hoc committees and not just portfolio committees to deal with those issues. We will ask for a meeting with the Speaker and also a meeting with the President to discuss matters affecting the country.
The extension of the national state of disaster by another month also came under the spotlight.
Well, it's a complete disaster for South Africa because it's going to be one more month with no tourists or very little tourists coming in. It's going to be another month of uncertainty with government's foot on the back of business. It's completely unnecessary.
It's a power play because the scientific reports are against what they are doing. The South Africans deserve to be rewarded. They have been punished for 2.5 years.
Some felt that it should end immediately. Others felt that we need to wait and see. But I think there was no unanimity on whether we should have the state of disaster removed immediately or not. But generally, we think that government is also dragging its feet, and the big concern for us is that political party leaders are not being consulted.
According to Olomisa, the Forum for Opposition Parties has also resolved to push for a secret ballot in parliamentary votes. This as there is set to be a no-confidence motion in President Cyril Ramaphosa and his cabinet on March 30. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament.
Well, UDM President General Bantu Olomisa joins us on the line to discuss these issues further. Good evening, General. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening to you and good evening to our viewers.
Just take us through your thinking as one of the people spearheading this move. Was it because you felt that as the opposition you are generally out of the loop, or you felt that both the leaders of both the legislature and the executive simply don't care?
No. You will recall that the forum of the opposition from time to time used to meet before the pandemic. But in the last 2 years, I think today's meeting was the first of its kind. And a lot has happened within this 2 years period. And we felt that we should converge and compare notes on issues of national importance. That menu included, for instance, the Mpati and Zondo Commission's findings. The question is, who is going to implement those findings, given that the president of the ruling party is also a head of government. But the question is, will he be a fair leader to do that task, given that his own political party is a beneficiary on these looted resources? And so on and so on. Then we also review the issue of security, that we are concerned because since July last year, we don't think that the ruling party has got, or the government has got an initiative. The initiative is not with them. They don't know what's going on until they convince us by coming up in the public and tell us who exactly was behind that mayhem. So we also looked at the issue of national state of disaster and say, apparently they just used the leaders of the opposition when they called us to support this 2 years ago. After that, they didn't care to brief us. So we felt that we cannot allow the ruling party to abuse their power. So we need to see the president, and especially on issues related to security, because whether you like it or not, if you talk the need to create more jobs, nobody is going to come here and invest if the security is not guaranteed. I mean, there's lawlessness in this country every day.
Now, if we take the state capture inquiry report as an example, the president, the last couple of times he spoke this year, said that, or felt the need to point out that he's not the one responsible for investigating, for prosecuting, for putting people in jail, and so on. Because if he was to do that, he would be interfering. So it's the job of state law enforcement agencies to do that, not his.
But at the same time, he keeps on saying that he needs time to apply his mind, and he would come up with a plan to implement those findings and recommendations. So he's contradicting himself. So the best thing for him would have been to table this report in public and leave it to the lawmakers to decide on it, because he's conflicted.
And what then would be, do you foresee or see as the role of the legislature, or you as legislators, once that report gets tabled, for example?
That's why today we agreed to establish ad hoc committees to look into or monitor the implementation of the cases which needs to go to the to NPA and other law enforcement agencies. But another ad hoc committee should focus on looking at the gaps which have caused for a lot of billions of rands to leave the fiscus. For instance, you look at the ministers usurping the powers of the accounting officers, where they issue political directives which are laced with corruption. therefore, we need to make sure that we tighten the rules and regulations around that. In our discussion, we were contemplating that we should possibly look at the appointing of a retired judge to work or to chair the session where he or she works with the law enforcement agencies, the lead evidence of these commissions, and also the forensic auditing, so that that judge can say this one goes to the law enforcement agencies, this one must go and be referred to Parliament for new legislation. So that committee would have worked with the parliamentary ad hoc committees. Don't rely on the executive. They are the ones who opened the gates for billions to leave the country and come to the house.
What I mean, for the sake of those of us who are not very familiar with how the parliamentary system works, the nitty-gritty and all of that, what would ad hoc committees do that which presumably portfolio committees and select committees can do?
Well, normally ad hoc committees are given specific terms of reference, and there might even be some hearings called. So they have a special powers, a little bit of independence, as opposed to just a portfolio committee.
Mm-hmm. Coming to the state of disaster, which is another issue you spoke about as the forum, what is your biggest concern? What is your worry? In other words, what is it that you feel South Africans can't do, because there still remains this state of disaster?
Well, this one was based on the economic performance. We thought that if the state of disaster is lifted, at least it would allow the entertainment industry, the sport, tourism, to boost the economy of South Africa. After all, tourism has always been one of the biggest entities which employs people. But these guys, they seem to be shooting themselves in their feet.
And the issue of the secret ballot, do you feel that there is perhaps enough dissent within the ANC that you may see a lot of them voting with you or agreeing with you when it comes to such things as votes of no confidence in the president?
This thing of secret ballot must not be equated with, automatically that because you are in the opposition, you will vote against the ANC or whatever. So the people must be free to vote. You may find that some of the members, like he has openly said, they wouldn't prefer to vote for against the president. They've said publicly. But that doesn't mean that some members of the TA automatically support their leader on that. So we need a little bit of freedom so that we can use our own conscience to vote for a person we want. So it's not a question hanging up against the ANC, but it's for people to be free to vote.
Okay, and so where to from here? You are writing, or you'll be writing to the National Assembly Speaker and the President, and that's where you left it at today's meeting.
We will do so, and also we will form these committees, especially the whips from the opposition, to look into the question of coalitions, because as we march towards 2024, we must learn from the mistakes which have happened at local government on coalitions. The truth of the matter is that coalitions are here to stay at the national level. So this committee which they have established is going to look at pre-election coalition agreements as well as post-election coalition agreements with a view to encourage the parliament to produce rules and regulations which are going to guide how the coalitions should work in South Africa so that coalitions are not disadvantage the communities and voters.
General, that's all we're going to leave it for tonight. Thanks very much for your time this evening.
Thank you, sir.
General Bantu Olomisa, the leader of the United Democratic Movement, on the back of that meeting by opposition parties that want Parliament to establish ad hoc committees to process several commission reports, Zondo Commission, Party Commission, into the PIC, the Mufamadi Commission, that looked at the state of the State Security Agency, and of course as several other inquiries that have taken place in the last while. They've resolved, as you've just heard, to write to the President and to the Speaker of the National Assembly, raising their concerns, but also how to move forward. Well, today being World Social Work Day, we speak to those people that look after those who can't look after themselves. That's coming up after this short break.
Nimrod Sibila never thought that what was a minor irritation with his eyes would lead to his diagnosis with glaucoma.
It's World Social Work Day, when people across the globe pause to reflect on the work of those that look after those who can't look after themselves. Famida Shaman is the CEO of the Association of the Aged, and in a moment we'll also be joined by Spesihle Kuzwayo, who is from the Unemployed Social Workers Movement. Famida, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. We lost our line to Spesihle. We're hoping that she will join us in a moment. Just what for you, does World Social Work mean?
Hello, Vuyo. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I think World Social Work Day spotlights the profession of social work, firstly. It also spotlights the people that people from the social work profession support. So I think it becomes quite an important day for us to highlight some of the socioeconomic issues that vulnerable people within our communities face, and to also spotlight opportunities to take forward the development agenda. So it's a day that we celebrate our profession, but it's a day also for reflection and to look at how can we, as social workers, as a community of social workers, engage with other partners so that we can create a world that is better for everyone.
I know that there's a theme that has been chosen, looking at eco-social world and that kind of thing. But just going through some of the things that your sector has been raising over time, one thought maybe there will be time or other people would deal with those kinds of issues. But let's talk about the things that are closer to home. I mean, we're still dealing as we speak, with your life testimony issues, for example, and a whole host of similar things taking place throughout the country. But what is your particular organizations? You're working with the aged. What are the issues there for you?
Yeah, I think working with a vulnerable group, obviously there are special needs within the older person sector that need to be addressed. I think the first thing is the whole issue around ageism and the fact that older people get sidelined in terms of services, but also in terms of funding opportunities. Unfortunately, the elder sector is not the most sexiest of sectors for donors and funders, and very often services and support to the sector is not prioritized in terms of CSI funding, in terms of donor funding, but also we have a society that's focused on youth and a society that would look rather to support other causes than the cause of older persons. So I think dealing with ageism is possibly one of the biggest issues we have to deal with. But there's also other infrastructure issues that needs to be sorted out. When we think about aging within the context of South Africa, ideally we want to create a world in which people are proud to grow old in, a world where they can live with dignity, where they can live as fulfilled individuals, where there's meaning to their life, and where they have access to basic services. Unfortunately, we haven't created that world, and I think we still have a long way to go. And I think on a day like this, we look for highlighting the issues, but also encouraging people to consider the role that older people play in society. Older people are just not consumers of service. They have a huge role to play in terms of contributing members of society, the wisdom that they carry, the mentorship, the guidance. These are all things that we don't see. And unfortunately, when people see an older person, they see consumers of health, or they see people who are beneficiaries of pensions only.
Just a quick one before I move to specific. Ageism. What exactly do you mean by that? Because, I mean, you know, we often or tend to use this rather loosely. For example, someone like me would think that, you know, I shouldn't be here because I'm old now. You know?
Yes. Oh, that's exactly it, Vuyo. So when you discriminate against someone on the basis of the age, that is ageism. You know, so if you're looking at within the workplace, if someone turns 60 and you have a policy which says that they are no longer allowed to work, then that would be ageism. If someone goes in for services and they are denied those services on the basis of age, that is ageism. You know, the extreme examples we saw during the COVID pandemic, for example, in some of the European countries where older people were denied medical services on the basis of their age. Obviously, that's a very extreme example of it, but you see it as soon as we start thinking that we need to behave differently on the basis of someone's age, then that is ageism, and that's something that we need to be addressing. Okay.
Specifically, let's bring you in. Hopefully the line's going to hold this time around. You represent an organization called the Unemployed Social Workers Movement. What exactly do you do? What does that organization do?
Thank you, sir. Good evening, and thank you so much, Mr. Vuyo, for having me this evening. In fact, Unemployed Social Workers Movement in South Africa, it's a movement which was actually founded in 2017. It actually addressed the matters affecting social workers, especially the unemployment plight, as there is a high demand for the employment creation in terms of hiring social workers, but we have noticed that government is not taking serious in terms of creating jobs for social workers. Yes. So Unemployed Social Workers Movement in South Africa is there to actually advocate, lobby on behalf of social workers nationally.
And you strongly believe that there needs to be, in other words, our sick, our old, our elderly, our infirm people actually need your services, perhaps more than has ever been the case before.
Yes, exactly. Within the society, everywhere, when we are looking some social issues to be addressed, not even nationally, on a global scale, social workers are in demand. Society needs social workers. Without social work intervention, society won't survive. That is why right now there are high cases of those who sometimes go through depression, and others, they end up taking away their lives. You know, there are so many social issues. Social work is a key. Without social work, if it's not taken seriously, you know, society won't survive. I'm talking from young people, children, to older people. We really need social workers within our society. I don't know why actually there is a challenge when it comes to job creation, because social workers must not actually remain seated at home, must be in the field to make change in people's lives.
And we are speaking here on behalf of people who have been trained, who are experienced.
Yes, exactly.
And some of them have actually, I mean, their training has been paid for by the government, I'm told.
Yes, in fact, you know, the training in field of social work is actually divided into three. There are social workers who got scholarships. I can say they've been trained by or offered training by social development covering bursary, and social workers who got training through NSFAS, and those who were actually using their own cash. Yes. So it's 4 years being at the university, and you go to organization for practical, meaning that you cannot graduate if you did not go through practical. And then others, they even go for to volunteer with local organizations, also find that above all those sacrifices, social workers remain unattended. You know, even in a budget speech, they are not actually considered to be hired.
Very briefly, specifically, what has been the attitude of government, or what have been the responses whenever you've engaged them?
I think my network is actually giving that problem. May you please...
Okay, I was asking, what has been the attitude of the government whenever you've had an opportunity to engage with them?
All right, thank you. In fact, the government has been hiding, has been saying the budget is a problem, and we have been trying by all means to engage even ministers. As I am talking, there is time whereby we have to engage with minister, and she did not actually show that interest to engage with us. They always saying they are not forgetting, they have not forgotten social workers. They are aware that social work is in demand, but comes to the point where now there is a budget speech, you'll find that social workers are not recognized anymore. That is a song for government. For so many years, they have been actually hiding. So it's really frustrating. As I'm talking, I have been attending to some cases whereby some of the fellow colleagues were committing suicide due to unemployment, you see, because they go to university with the hope to change their background and change their society. And when now they are not actually practicing their profession, it causes depression. I have addressed these matters. On top of that, there is counsel every year. Social workers must pay. Where do you get money to pay for counsel if you are not working? And there is no such an active advocacy structure which is in place to actually lobby on behalf of social workers. That is a huge challenge, especially in South Africa.
Famida, has that been your experience as well when it comes to engagement around, because funding, infrastructure, and those issues are issues you also raised?
Absolutely. I think, my colleague raises very valid points around social workers who have been trained, but are unable to find employment because there aren't any positions available. And I think, here's the opportunity where the government can liaise with nonprofit organizations as well, in terms of being able to look for opportunities to subsidize social work posts so that nonprofit organizations can provide the platform for unemployed social workers to find employment and thereby take forward the development agenda. I think that, there was a huge push towards training more social workers because it was identified as a scarce skill a couple of years ago. That's when they started the whole bursary system. As a result, they've created a pool of social workers who are now available to be employed, but the Department of Social Development hasn't come to the party in terms of being able to fund the posts. Now,
let me read you something here, and I'll ask you for your final word on this, Famida. Part of the statement that the department has issued in commemoration of this day says, to further improve the image of the social work profession and instill moral support for social workers and social auxiliary workers, the department recommits itself that it will engage networks and professional associations and professionals to promote the integration of eco-social work practice in the education and practice of the profession. Such an approach will be pursued with anticipation that social workers across the country will be equipped to respond to community needs emanating from the impact of climate and environmental changes on the quality of life and functioning of people of the country and the world. Now, with your experience, do you see this coming to fruition?
No, I actually don't. So if I have to be totally honest, these are wonderful words. They are correct in terms of the current theme. But if there is no commitment in terms of resources to actually put this into place, it just remains a promise and it remains something to be seen. I would love to be proven wrong, and I'd love to see that these plans come to fruition. However, with the challenges that we've experienced on the ground, just in terms of basic service delivery, to look at creating this kind of platform requires commitment from the Department of Social Development. It requires a willingness to engage. It requires that these kinds of things are prioritized, remains on the agenda. And to be honest, I've not seen it anyway. So, I'm not very hopeful. However, I'm more than open to any kind of conversation that the department would like to have around how this engagement would take place and how we can take forward this kind of agenda. That benefits, I think, the most vulnerable ultimately, because that's the point, isn't it? We, as social workers, our role is to ensure that we create a society where people can thrive. Okay. And that's what we want to be able to do.
Okay, and that's where we're going to leave it. Special thanks to both of you, Famida Shaman, who is the CEO of the Association for of the Aged, and specifically Kuzwaya, who is from the Unemployed Social Workers Movement. Now, members of Parliament today held a debate on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We leave you with excerpts from that debate. Have a good night.
We may be 9,000 kilometers away, but we will soon feel its effect in every single aspect of South African life. When the oil price skyrockets through to 30 to 40 rand, as it's being predicted, this will be our war too.
South Africa's relationship with the Russian Federation is rooted in true bonds of libertarian brotherhood. At the core of the Soviet Union was the Russian Federation, and anyone who argues otherwise is being dishonest. The USSR and Russia in particular dedicated military, political and ideological resources in the struggle against colonialism and apartheid in South Africa.
We must call out Russia on its wrongness. The invasion of Ukraine and the current war is wrong and in total violation of every international statute and protocol in existence.
To get to a situation where you think that it doesn't influence you as a citizen or as a person in South Africa because it's far away, then you are misleading yourself. And then I didn't even talk about the influence of fuel prices.
The ACDP would like to know
why President Ramaphosa is not calling President Zelensky just as he called President Putin.
We need to agree as South Africans on what is our national interest out there. Otherwise, we will be victims of these superpowers.
Rising commodity prices may well be an outcome of this war and may advantage some sectors of our economy, but equally rising oil prices will be disastrous.
Who is the root cause of this whole problem? It is clearly the West and the United States of America.
Fuel prices will continue to take a hammer. Russia is our main source of gas, coal, fuel, and oil. Load shedding will worsen as the cost of diesel increases. This will affect Eskom's emergency electricity stream supply, which largely relies on diesel and coal. Consumers will be hard hit.
We call on the superpowers, including Russia and America, to do away with nuclear weapons, and the doctrine of spheres of influence between America and Russia must be abandoned. The Security Council must be reformed to remove the veto powers of the superpowers, and the continent of Africa and other continents must have permanent seats in the Security Council.
Al-Jamaa agrees with meaningful engagement. It is time now for the invasion to stop, or at least a ceasefire and human corridors to be established so that more meaningful engagement can take place.
Although we are concerned about the impact of the conflict on capital flows into the South African economy, our trade and financial links with both nations are relatively small. This is expected to provide consideration insulation against the trade and financial shocks caused by the ongoing conflict.
The United Nations Children's Fund is appealing for $255 million